Welcome everyone to another episode of the Week in Italian Startup. In this episode, main focus I would say infrastructure, data, and nuclear. So some of the biggest theme that usually cyclically happen in the Italian ecosystem. And also for 2026, we're getting there. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah. I agree, Jack. We are in the core of the themes that we hear every day worldwide: energy, infrastructure, AI.
There you go. There you go. The three main that
Yeah,
we're gonna see, and
the
we will
second
see more and
triangle.
more. Exactly. All right, let's start from actually the big news about Newcleo. So French-Italian startup that we've mentioned many times in this podcast, raising 75 million in a growth round from Kairos, Indaco Ventures, Azimut, CERN Pension Fund, and then a number of actually industrial investors. So let's talk about this, and maybe let's start from your first reaction, Nick, on this round.
Well, I have to say, nothing surprising. We have always known that Newcleo would be a company requiring a lot of capital. Let's remind everybody what they're doing. They're basically developing a new generation of small nuclear reactors, and they want to create them end to end. So project design, building. So a very bold plan, and that plan will require a lot of money.
Yeah.
I think they are actually also have a very bold roadmap ahead of them. So just they want to have the first operating reactor in just a few years.
I think there is a plan for one of the prototype this year, 2026 in the timeline. So yeah,
That
totally agree
that's
with you.
that's
Yeah,
that's
that's very
aggressive.
bold. That's
Yeah.
aggressive, exactly. So for the nerd out there, what I wanna give them is just the three acronyms that I think it's important to remember when reading about Newcleo, because it's a very technical company. So the first one is, as you say, SMRs, with the small modular reactors, which is basically the core value proposition of a piece of the core proposition of Newcleo, which is kind of miniaturizing reactor technology in a way that is very deployable in a very much different settings across different applications. So SMR is one of the first sort of thing to remember. The second thing, which is the second piece of the puzzle, is MOX-Fuel in particular, which stands for mixed uranium plutonium oxides. So essentially, this is the waste of nuclear fuel after it's been processing by traditional nuclear reactor. And essentially, the reactor runs on this kind of MOX fuel. So what is interesting, as you mentioned, is the circularity of the solution. So they want to transform nuclear waste into energy. That's really the big purpose. Another element, which I would say it's helpful to keep in mind, is the MW, the megawatt sort of measurement, which is helpful. So there are two kinds that are often mentioned in this article. One is megawatt thermal, and the other one is megawatt electric. And it's just basically two different measures of how much heat basically they're producing during the process versus how much electricity is essentially harnessed and can be actually inputted into an electric system. So these are the two elements, and it's a measure of efficiency essentially on how efficient the company is to build electricity out of heat. And one of the value proposition of Newcleo is to be extremely efficient in doing that. So just a three very quick reminder of these three elements. So yeah, as you say, end-to-end solution, and I think what is interesting is also the sort of the investor, the industrial investor that are participating, and that's a strong signal that what they're doing is essentially betting on this kind of technology to power steel, chemicals, and ship making, which will run apparently on recycled nuclear waste. So heavy intense in the industries with this kind of objective. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I was taking a look on Crunchbase, which reminds us that Newcleo raised more than $760 million to date. That's the measure of how much capital intensive it is. It was still pre-production. And I thought that the other interesting angle was who invested in the round. So we see Indaco Ventures is a venture capital firm. Kairos, an asset management company, and Azimut as well, an asset management company. As you mentioned, we have both angles investing here. So also pure play VC firms and industrial partners. So that's a very broad surface of interest for Newcleo.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what I would say is really kind of infrastructure-heavy industries in the cap table. So it's really tilting, and since the beginning has been kind of tilting that way. So the skill there is really to balance out the, as you say, the sort of the venture bet with the infrastructural investors. So that's it's actually I would feel that that's a way to hedge risk, actually, like having those kind of investors and giving signals to the market. Pretty powerful, I would say. So one other element that I thought was interesting is, well, as you mentioned, no revenue for now. I think revenue is expecting to 2033. Some report says that, so it's a long way, essentially. But despite of that, I think they've been acquiring a few companies also in the supply chain of what Newcleo is trying to build. So if we can maybe interpret that as a way to sort of make the balance sheet better in a way that actually some revenue is generated, but at the same time supports the operation without being a pure sort of black hole, high sort of return shot for the future, I would say. So I thought it was interesting, this kind of balance. Now it's a little bit of a bold claim, but yeah, it's interesting to see this dynamic and maybe keep this in mind.
Yeah. Good point. If you want to be more explicit, they made 3 acquisitions according to Crunchbase. And as you mentioned, in the supply chain, so design companies for complex systems, steel machinery producers, that's interesting. So they're integrating their supply chain and R&D capabilities in order to move faster, I presume. That's interesting.
No, absolutely. Big aggregator, big play. And the goal is really to become like infrastructure, like a big end-to-end infrastructure play. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I only wonder on the other side of the equation, the appetite for building SMR centers, because even if they consume waste, nuclear waste, there's still nuclear reactors, and I wonder how the public opinion would react in these circumstances. So think about Italy; it's currently banned, as far as I know. Germany, they somehow changed course and started shutting down nuclear reactors. France is the country who's investing in the area, I think. I'm really curious about how the macro will evolve.
Interesting, yeah. And the macro and the politics like behind it is probably not easy to handle. It's not the classic like SaaS startup building a huge company and breaking everything. These guys need to behave it in a good way.
Break is not the right term in this case. It's not. It's the only term you shouldn't use.
Move fast, yes, but don't break it, please.
Don't break it.
So basically continuing on the other side of the coin, which I think is interesting that you mentioned kind of the reserves to that. One other element is the U.S. nuclear startup seeing basically a crash in funding. So in 2021 to 2022, I think these kind of companies raised around $4 billion against only about 246 million in 2023. So US, let's take it with very cautiously, because US has been, of course, they have big spikes and then they come down and then again big spikes. Europe seems a little bit more consistent, so we might see a path of growth here, and it kind of feels more like a marathon. So US is kind of sprinting and kind of stopping and maybe sprinting again. Europe shows a more consistent pace, I would say. So there was an interesting element here. All right, so let's move on to another big player, which is Retelit, investing 100 million in 2 new AI-ready data center in Milan, Bisceglie. So essentially, every year we see like big infrastructure investments around Milan in some place or another. Retelit historically has been essentially doing really well, investing in Italian infrastructure. I think just to remind the listener, acquiring BT Italia in 2024 and basically adding about 11,000 kilometers of fiber and of course data center capacity around Italy. On top of that, acquiring a company called Sparkle, which handles submarine cables. So this is very interesting because they're really positioning themselves to be one of the leading operator in Italy. So definitely an interesting angle here.
Yeah, agreed. I thought it was interesting to see this acquisition though. So the point is there are investments in our area and acquiring and operating data centers. In this case, the term investment is, I believe, kind of a misnomer because from the article they acquired the data centers that were developed by another holding company. But I thought it was quite interesting to see that we have actually activity in that space here in our whereabouts. And probably being close to Milan is by design because as you mentioned they're close to most of their customers somehow.
Yep.
There's a thriving economy around services and IT here. I think that we will see more of this coming up. Also from bigger players, so there will be a lot of movement in the data center economy somehow.
Yeah. And I would say this is a wave that is also powered by the Italian government willing to invest in this kind of infrastructure. So yeah, these guys are basically moving fast to actually get the best positions, I would say. So that's gonna, and we're talking about billions and billions. So that's very important to notice.
It should surprise us that Retelit is actually was actually acquired a few years ago by kind of a private equity or investment management firm. So the one that we are seeing is a classic platform and acquisition play where they're building a lot of capacity in a very interesting angle of the market.
Yeah,
I would say very interesting.
So is Bisceglie becoming the Italian Silicon Valley?
I have no idea.
So yeah, no,
well,
it's
maybe it will become the US one area like AWS, US East one, no US West.
Yeah.
0.
Awesome. Awesome. I think there is also another element that people actually, well, beside the infrastructural part and the investments, there is also an angle which is tiny right now, but I think it can be very powerful in the future, which is the idea of heat reuse becoming the new competitive advantage. So big problem here. I mean, data center, they need a lot of cooling, a lot of water, a lot of whatever. And so they produce heat, but then how exactly can you use that heat? So the double dip is really when companies like them, they're trying to actually build data center that actually can give back the heat in some form to actually monetize on a different angle. So that's pretty interesting, and that can definitely, an interesting play to reuse heat and kind of heat up Milan through AI, I would say. So think about this.
Yeah. I think in Finland they're doing that. So there was news about a seat in Finland. I don't remember which one.
So there is, I've seen a few like early stage companies actually doing that. So basically what they do is that they substitute your house heating unit. They put like servers that heat up, that run AI models, and then they heat up your water for your shower. So essentially...
in a distributed way, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, and they're footing the electricity bill.
Yeah.
The point is who's footing the electricity bill, because that's the point.
Yeah, that's true. But at least it's I'm not using other fuel sources, so that's
Well,
and I'm using data.
maybe, yeah, well, maybe this is an interesting one. Even though you
It's an
need a
interesting.
bit of infrastructure but
Yeah,
still.
yeah. But actually, if you
But
buy
I've got a
the,
spare garage in my building that,
there you
if
go,
anybody is
there you go.
listening and wants to rent it for this, why not?
Awesome. All right, let's end up with a very interesting case, kind of running up and hitting an interesting and quick success. So Omney, financial education startup, raising about $500,000 in pre-seed round. So very interesting angle. So basically, what Omni is doing is trying to fight financial illiteracy in Italy. Italy is basically one of the lowest in Europe in terms of financial literacy, according to data from OECD. So there is basically a lot of financial advisor sort of registered, but only a very, very small minority are actually truly independent. Most of them, they run on commission, which basically triggers a big problems when it comes to promoting financial services. There is not much transparency. Banking costs are opaque sometimes. So Omni is fighting all of that. It's trying to bring clarity to this kind of industry. And what is interesting is that they start as an educational play. So they are selling courses on basically financial education. And in just 1 week, basically, they made the same money that they raised in their pre-seed. So I would say they have a very high level of penetration. They have a lot of subscribers. I think it's about 35,000 total. So they're really building a very interesting machine that address a very core problem that Italy is having. So I thought it was very, very interesting.
Yeah, good one.
Right. So, having said that, Nick, one last thing I want to say is that I encourage people to check out Nick's interview with Giulio Michelon about venture capital. I think it was fun. Giulio is a good friend of this podcast, being on this podcast a couple of years ago. So that's shout out to him and kudos to you guys, because it was a very interesting sort of technical introduction to venture capital and how it works. So for first-time founders, I think it's interesting to very well understand the dynamic of venture capital. So that's a very, very good resource.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. I had fun recording it, I have to say. It's in Italian, unfortunately, but still. I hope useful.
Awesome. Right, Nick, thank you so much, and see you next week.